All right, guys, I am excited about this. Get ready. Today we are talking with Ashleigh Chapman. Ashleigh has an amazing journey. She is a human rights lawyer and an expert on human trafficking. She has been working hard for the last 20 years to protect the most vulnerable populations. Among her many efforts, Ashleigh is the founder of Justice U, which is an online learning platform that delivers training from some of the top experts in the anti-trafficking movement and delivers it in a way that everyone can better understand the specific things they can be doing to help end human trafficking. She's working domestically and internationally. For example, Ashleigh has helped the Senate of Mexico, get this, establish their first ever comprehensive legislation to combat human trafficking. She's serving as an advisor to the U.S. Senate on the Foreign Relations Committee to create the End Modern Slavery Act. How cool is that? She's helping to establish the Freedom Council, which is an assembly of business leaders and global companies dedicated to the cause of ending human trafficking. And she's led training in over 100 cities in 8 different nations. Absolutely amazing work. I can't wait to dig into how this all got started for her, what she's learned so far, and to get her perspective on what's next. So let's get to this. Ashleigh, welcome to Dream Think Do.
Thank you, Mitch. Love to be here.
This
Excited
is
to join you.
awesome. Absolutely. Before we hit record, I told you, I said, this is probably one of the heaviest, but maybe one of the biggest, most important conversations, most important topics we've ever gone after with Dream Think Do. So I'm so excited to dive into this with you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it certainly is heavy, but we are very much driving hope, right? I mean, we can change it. That's the goal.
Absolutely. So, and then I love that. I in my research, I listened to a couple of different episodes or a couple of different interviews with you and some of your writing and things. And I mean, I hear that passion and the belief that we could actually end human trafficking in our era, which I think is one of the most audacious and one of the best dreams we've ever heard. So I love that. So let's dive into this. I mean, you've been doing this work for 20 years. This is not something you stumble into. This is not something someone takes lightly. How did this become a passion area for you?
Yeah, so to answer that question takes me back to when I was 11 years old. So I was really convicted one night about just that God was waking me up every morning with a purpose, and I wasn't asking him what that was.
Wow.
So I decided I would really dive into keeping my eyes and ears open to what that might be. And 2 weeks later, my parents took into their care 3 children who'd been horribly abused in nearly every possible way. So I went on a sort of a 6-month-long journey with my family, caring for 3 little souls who'd gone through some terrible things in their little lives, watching a whole community set of systems that were completely broken, that could have prevented what the abuse they had suffered and ought to have been caring for them better, but we were just struggling there every single day to keep these kids safe. And then just really learning all about God's heart for the oppressed and vulnerable. And once miraculously those children were adopted out of that situation, it took a long time to get them there to safety, but once that happened, I just told my parents, I think I'm here on this planet to solve this, to stop this, to help communities heal themselves, and I think I need a law degree to do it. So it's been the only focus of pretty much my entire life.
But the seed really was one, you realizing, hey, I've got a purpose. Like we talk about dreaming bigger, thinking better, and doing more of what you were put on the planet to do. And you were actually working on figuring out what you were put on the planet to do at 11.
Yeah.
And then looking around, what I love is that you actually at 11 had the belief, one, that you were put on the planet to do something, but 2, that you could actually start figuring that out at that young of age. And then boom, this thing presented itself, which I'm sure was a blessing and really hard as well.
Yeah, it was really hard. It was really my first introduction to the horrors that exist on this planet, for vulnerable individuals. And then just immediately what was presenting itself to me, or where my brain was going, was why? Right. Why is this happening? Like, how could it get this bad? Why could we not have prevented this in the first place? Why is it so hard to keep these individuals safe, even when, you know, they've been removed from a difficult situation. So
Right.
even at 11, I might have used crayons instead of spreadsheets at the time, but I was sketching out,
God bless
you know,
crayons.
like,
I wish we had a little more crayon in our life. So yeah,
I
but
know,
still.
yeah. My parents were, I'm sure, a little bit taken aback, but I was just, you know, trying to sketch out, okay, what are all the things that have to be firing in a community to
Yeah.
end this? And
Wow.
and that's just really been literally the only thing I focused on every day since, and it's taken me on this massive journey, you know, to
That's
today.
incredible. Oh my gosh, there's so many questions firing in my brain. One of which is, what did your parents think when here you are? I'm sure you know it's a couple years past your 11 right now, and
Yeah.
you've been and helping with these kids, your foster siblings, and all that, and you're like,
Mhm.
Mom, Dad, I think I'm supposed to help end this thing. Were they excited? Were they horrified? Were they something in between?
Yeah, I think I was born old, right? So I think they were not surprised,
Yeah.
and they were incredibly supportive. My dad was a pastor of the homeless mission downtown
Wow.
Nashville when we grew up, and so he and obviously my mom were entrenched in, you know, reaching
Sure.
hurting families. So so for me, it was more about, you know, because there's the direct service side of it, and I've been there too, you know,
Right.
in the last 20 years. But then there's the systematic change. Like,
Yeah.
what does it actually take to turn the tide? So we can respond to something, or we can, and it's a different kind of calculus, you know.
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
sort of where we've been sitting all this time. Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely amazing. So, well, let's go ahead and start turning the ship that direction, because you started to talk about like the systematic things that we can be doing, and that's, I know that a lot of where you spend your days. But let's talk about this a little bit, because I got to admit, you kind of blew up my world a little bit, because when your team reached out, I was like, gosh, human trafficking seems like an important thing. But I'll be
Mm-hmm.
honest, I had not looked at it a lot. I'd not looked at the data, not looked at the stories, and probably just to protect my brain a little bit, all that stuff, right? But I start digging into your stuff, and it is absolutely amazing. I'll be the first one to admit, I was thinking, kind of like you say, I was thinking it's all over there. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's, you hear about it happening around big events like the Super Bowl, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you hear about it in international cities over there where like
Mm-hmm.
human trafficking, but it involves so many different types of people. It involves so many different horrendous things.
Mm-hmm.
So to the best of your ability, kind of give us a snapshot when you're kind of ushering people into awareness. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about what human trafficking actually looks like in 2020.
Sure. So to tell that story, the preface I'll give is the world really didn't wake up to human trafficking, this sort of modern day form of
Yeah.
slavery. We thought it was over, right?
Right.
We thought we had dealt with that
Yeah.
150 years ago or so. But in 2000, the world woke up to it, including the United States, that
Huh.
trafficking was a thing. It was a thing to sell human beings, men, women, and children, for sex, labor, or organs. But even when we woke up to it, we said, as the US, we said, oh, it's over there, which is
Right.
why still people think you have that framework. It really wasn't until 2010 when the United States started to wake up to the fact that here in the US, we were having a serious problem with human trafficking. And to point out those kinds of mythbusters, you know, that
Yeah.
people kind of have to go through it first. You know, when you first hear about human trafficking, you're thinking, some people think, well, it must be, you know, it must be this terrible and yet small thing,
Right.
right? Like, this is terrible and it's happening to a small amount of people. First of all, we need to understand the scope. We're talking about over 40 million souls globally who are being trafficked all around the world. And I think that's a wildly conservative figure, because I work with those
Wow.
agencies who collect that data, and we're still trying to get a pulse on it. And then it's $150 billion industry. So to put that into perspective, in 2018, human traffickers made more than Forbes' top 5 companies combined. That's Google, Microsoft, Berkshire Hathaway, Wells Fargo combined. So that's the scope we're looking at, and it just exploded. It just exploded over the last 20 years. Here in the
Wow.
United States, a decade ago, we were thinking maybe 100,000 to 300,000 of U.S. children were being trafficked in our country. The fact that we didn't know that number is unacceptable, right?
Right.
But we didn't. That was the range. But Texas, 18 months ago or so, just released a report that said they think they have 313,000 victims in their state alone. So 313,000 human trafficking victims. That's adults and children for nationals and domestic. But by extrapolation, we're approaching 1 million victims in the United States.
So that's just in one state. Just to be clear, Texas data was just about their own state, not what they're anticipating was the whole country. It's one state.
One state. And we still are training communities in states that have never received training on human trafficking before. You know, back about 5 years ago when we started training Midwest states, they were maybe identifying 2 victims a year. After the training, and we just go city by city by city by city and train their law enforcement and teachers and pastors and everyone, you know, in the community, it would jump to over 600 in a year identifications, not because it just started to happen, but we're just starting to see it.
The people actually being able to identify, hey, that person actually might be in trouble. Because that was one of the other things that shocked me is that, of course, some people are kept very much under wraps, but there are others that might be out right in front of everybody, but still being trafficked.
Yeah, trafficked in broad daylight. And traffickers are pretty, you know, they've gotten more and more brazen, but it really depends on the type of trafficking you're looking at. And that's another myth that people have, right? So too, they think trafficking in the United States must be those people over there, right, who are being trafficked across our borders into here. And depending on what federal agency you ask, that number might be between 25,000 and 35,000. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens. And the number one population that's being trafficked are our children who are coming out of or presently in foster care. That's the number one vulnerable population. So traffickers exploit vulnerabilities. And they're looking to exploit people that we are not paying attention to in our society. So runaway and homeless youth, children aging out of foster care, individuals who've gone through other types of trauma, right, or have behavioral health or physical health issues. They're going to exploit that vulnerability and use it for labor or sex trafficking, which means that, by the way, if we can come around those vulnerabilities, we can combat trafficking head on, and we can also prevent it from ever happening in the first place.
Which I love. And I think that's such a strong point to make, is that, you know, I think it's easy to think, well, like, I can't go in and bust up a house that's got, you know, it's like they think it's got to be some Herculean effort, but there's a lot of things people can do. And as I told you before we hit record, Dream Think Doers are, you know, we dream big, we think better, and we're all about doing stuff. So let's talk about, and I know that, you know, that's something you're doing with Justice U too, which I think is fantastic, but what are some of the specific things, like, you know, we've got a lot of listeners from around the world. So what are some things that Dream Think Doers can do in their own communities right now to help on this front?
Yeah. So many things is the answer. So very many things, you know, and people, tend to go there in their brains, right? They say, oh my gosh, I can't drop everything and become an FBI agent, or, you know, stand up a restoration facility and quit my job and become a nonprofit director and raise $2 million and stand up, you know, a home, right, for survivors. And they think because those are the only 2 paths to making an impact, you know, they shy away from the whole issue altogether, right? They think people shut their eyes and close their ears to dark issues, to terrible things. I'm convinced, not because they don't care, but because they don't know that they can make a difference, right? And so we are trying to say there are not 10 things to do to combat trafficking. There are 1,000 things that need to be happening in your city to help combat human trafficking, both those who are already caught in it and all those who are in the pipeline to it, because we're not caring for them well, right? So we have to kind of move beyond rescue operations in our minds to how do we prevent trafficking? How do we identify it? How do we support law enforcement when rescue operations happen? How do we help through the restoration process? And that's not just aftercare, that's reintegration. So how do we set up a person who's come through maybe a lifetime of trauma, ended up in the hands of traffickers, and now what's on the other side of that, even if they are rescued? So how do we build bridges to education and business opportunities and living wage jobs and all of that? And then what needs to change in our city? This is the critical piece, right? What do we need to reform in our city that's leading to this reality? And that's very localized. So there's this kind of global understanding of human trafficking, not just geographic, but just understanding it kind of the big picture, and then pulling it down to your community, and then understanding how you are uniquely positioned to engage this. And that's the journey I'm traveled before 2020, about 40 to 48 weeks every year, helping communities walk through that and helping individuals walk through it. But about 2 years ago, I was on a plane just thinking, my gosh, I think I hit 3 cities in one day doing trainings. And at the end of the day, I thought, we're just never going to get there. We're never going to get this message out to all the millions of people it's going to take to save millions of lives. We're going to have a different engine to do that. And that's the birth of Justice U. And so if you go to Justice U, we walk you through that journey. You go from awareness to an action plan that's unique to you.
That's awesome. I love it. And I love innovations, right? Like I actually love the era that we're in. I mean, suck it, COVID. We'll figure something. I think COVID's actually going to spark more innovations, all of that. But like, it is amazing that, you know, you've been able to, I know it's a lot of your teaching experts, you know, other experts from around the world and really practical steps, which is absolutely amazing. So I want to point people to Justice U, especially at the end of the conversation. But when you think about like, all right, normal person, like you said, they're not in law enforcement. They're not going to go and kick in doors. Although I'm sure a lot of Dream Think doers will be fired up enough to do it. But what are a couple of top tips? I know I'll just say one of the interviews that I heard, you know, you were talking about those that are vulnerable. And honestly, my family and I found ourselves finally in the food court at the local mall. It felt like we were back in the promised land. You know, only 4 of the 5 restaurants or whatever were open, but we're like, we're back. And I remember seeing a young teenager off on his own. And I'm like, that's one of the vulnerables that Ashleigh's talking about right here, right now, you know? So what are like 3 top quick tips that you can, that anybody can really start to employ right now?
Sure. The first one I'd say, to your point, is to open our eyes and look longer at something that we might otherwise dismiss, right? Yeah. So open our eyes and ears and think on it longer and look longer and make sure a person's not in harm's way. Let's be our brother's keeper. Yeah. So to your point, if you're seeing a youth that seems to be alone in like a mall setting, which is prime target for traffickers to go in and recruit from, keep an eye out for a second. I always do. I'm the worst, right? Like I'm watching everyone. My husband's constantly like, Ashleigh, they're okay. I'm like, well, wait a second. I just need to make sure.
Stay. You know, yeah, I got eyes on. I got eyes on. Yeah,
that's right. Because
and I think just to really, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that was a point that you made earlier or in a different conversation was, and I was like, gosh, I had not even thought about that, but traffickers initially seem like the nicest people on the planet. They're inviting kids, you know, they'll engage the kid that's the loner, finally invite him to a party, whatever. And they finally feel included in the wham. It's a really subtle, very defined process they take these kids through.
Yeah. And let's sit on that for a second, because, you know, most people think of trafficking because they've seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, right? So that's in their minds,
right?
Which, you know, love Liam Neeson. He's
right,
right.
Forget about it.
Go for it, dude. But because of that, the good thing was it raised awareness, right, of a very real thing happening all around the globe. But the challenging thing was it presented this picture that trafficking is abductions and chains.
Yeah.
And instead of what's happening, especially here in the United States, now abductions happen and chains happen. It's horrific. But the overwhelming majority of what's going on is that traffickers are approaching people in need, who are in desperate need, which is why right now COVID-19 is greatly exacerbating those vulnerabilities that traffickers can exploit. And they present themselves as an answer to that need, right? So, hey, I have a job that I'd like to offer you, or hey, I have a place you can stay, right? If you're homeless, or they do the Romeo situation, right? Especially with youth, right? So we're building this relationship. Now this youth thinks I've got someone who cares for me. Maybe my family was breaking apart or whatever it was that I needed, especially foster youth, right? That sense of belonging is so core. So this idea that I belong to someone, that they care for me, but then all of a sudden it turns into an absolute nightmare, and force, fraud, coercion, all of that gets mixed in to the point where I don't think I have an escape, and I wouldn't have a support network to go to even if I did, right? Wow. So that's how it happens. So yes, so we need to understand that it is a process initiated sometimes in plain sight as well as online. So if we go back to kind of your question about what can we do now, right? Online. So the first thing is look longer. If something doesn't look right, then go with your gut instinct and just stay on that for a second. And if you're still concerned, then what you need to do is just call your local law enforcement. There's no harm in this, right? So you call the national hotline, but you say, I'm a little concerned here, right? Like, this is what I'm seeing. And here's why. And the best thing you can do is call your local law enforcement and ask to be connected to the person who's been trained on human trafficking. Because because even law enforcement, if they've not been trained, do not understand what you're talking about.
Sure.
They might be like, that's just a kid who's acting up, or, oh, that's just, maybe a foreign national person who's afraid of, immigration issues, right? They don't understand what's going on. So ask to talk to the right person and tell them what you're concerned about. I'll give it a good example of this in my own personal life.
Yeah.
So we vacation in this great little spot 4 generations of my family have. And a couple of summers ago, I noticed that there was a massive influx of foreign national, young, gorgeous girls, all from Eastern European countries, all of a sudden working in a group of stores, a cluster of stores in town.
Huh.
And that concerned me. That was a concern for me. Not that people can't come over on work visas or student visas or tourist visas, but this massive kind of shift, right?
Just
in
all
employment.
of a sudden, kind of overnight, like one season, like, wait a second. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I started to look a little closer and noticed that there were men stationed at each of those storefronts, watching very carefully all the girls who were working there. Also, by the way, no boys were working there. It was all young women. And then I started talking to the business owners next door, and they started to say, yeah, these girls are working round the clock. And then others in town were saying, hey, these girls are having to work all day long, and we think they're involved in prostitution, right? They kind of hush hush say it. And they were not seeing what they needed to see. And then I talked to one of the girls. Now, I wouldn't suggest doing this because, because that could put you or her in danger, right?
Sure.
But I said, hey, tell me about how you got here. How'd you come to this great city? And she tells me the details. I won't share, because it's under investigation right now. But she tells me the details of how she and all these other girls got here and what they'd been promised and where they were going to go after. And it just, my heart just sank because it was classic labor and sex trafficking model used by organized crime. So I called the FBI right away and, and submitted all the information, and it's under investigation. Now, in a different context, I was training a group of people in Minneapolis last year, business leaders in that city. And this woman went down to a hotel in Houston, and she called me from that training a couple of weeks after. And she said, I'm concerned, and I'm sitting here in this hotel, and I think trafficking is happening. What do I do? And I said, well, what's the hotel? And she told me the hotel. And I said, well, they have actually signed a pledge to combat human trafficking, so their manager should be trained. So I would talk to the manager. And she said, well, what if it's the manager?
Oh, wow.
And what was happening was men were coming in through the hotel asking, and the manager would ask them what flavor they wanted and started listing off different nationalities like they were ordering food. And then the individual would say that the hotel owner was giving that man a key and saying, well, she'll be up soon. Right. So that it was just brazen. And they were doing it because they didn't see that she was sitting right around the corner working in the lobby. So we were able to get the Houston Police Department immediately on that. So,
and so this is not 10 years ago. This is not 50 years ago. This is right now.
That's right now. That's absolutely yes. So there has never been a training we've done, I'll say this, ever, where immediately in the room, people start flagging situations that they've seen that are absolutely human trafficking situations, and they just didn't know it because they didn't know what to look for.
Right.
And so that again, go to Justice U. We've also got even just a blog there, about the key indicators. Just start learning. You've got to start learning. So if we don't take time to learn before we act, and this is any issue, right? I mean, no matter what the issue, if we don't take time to learn first, then we're not going to be as strategic and impactful, and we may be harmful, to what's going on. So,
and I love that. I appreciate that so much about, what you're doing and your message is that this is truly one of those areas where if everyone actually started to take action, not in a vigilante kind of Liam Neeson way, although that'd be pretty cool, right? But I mean, it's like if everybody looked longer, right? And were intentional and got trained up, it really is something that could end in our generation, at least, in our country and then globally. So I love that. And I so appreciate that about your work. Now, speaking of that, I think, you bring up a great area that I want to touch on as we're wrapping up the conversation. We could literally talk for hours on this. So I so appreciate your generosity. But I know with a lot of Dream Think doers, whether they're 11, whether they're 31, whether they're 81,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people have areas they are passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
areas that they feel like, gosh, I feel called to that. I want to help in that area. Maybe they feel it's massive, like it might feel insurmountable, right? But they still want to do something. And that's something you've done, right? Like that when you started this thing, when you've been working on it for 20 years, I'm sure there's times where you had to be thinking, is this even, are we making a dent? Is there anything, right? So what would be one or two quick tips that you would offer a dream think doer that maybe has a passion area, but
Mm-hmm.
they're just like, oh my gosh, it's too big. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want to do something. I feel called to it. I'm passionate about it, but it just feels too big. What would you recommend to that person that's sitting there right now?
Okay. So I think so many things, right? But
Right.
I'm trying to distill it in my mind. The first thing is, we live in a culture of people who are desperately trying to learn how they're unique.
Yes.
We take all these personality quizzes, we take all these aptitude tests, right? We want to know how we are unique. I think we're doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice there, because the real question is, how are you uniquely positioned? So if I'm just trying to discover how I'm unique, that's all about me. But if I'm trying to understand how I'm uniquely positioned, that means what makes me unique is going to help someone else, right? So all those experiences and all those aptitudes and all of that knowledge I've gained so far and everything, up to this point, no matter if you're 11 or 81, right? Like there is something you are uniquely positioned to do that is going to help someone else. So when people ask me, how do you discern calling? Well, what are you burdened for, right? As you kind of look around you. So is it foster care kiddos? Is it single moms? Is it individuals struggling with homelessness or drug addictions? Is it human trafficking, right? Which is sort of the culmination of all of those things. What is it that you're burdened for? Learn everything about it. This is the other thing. Like, don't react. This is something that is the reason our systems are broken, is because we are reactionary. We are not strategic. So learn everything you can about the issue, about who's already doing great work in that area, and then try to discern where the gaps are. And then the last thing I'd say is, hey, it's a process, right? So we break that down into 3 buckets. You can enhance what you're already doing to help with that issue. You can come alongside those who are doing it well and help. Or if you found a gap, maybe you are uniquely positioned to fill it. And that's kind of where that whole social entrepreneurship piece comes in.
Good Lord. That was like 45 minutes distilled down into an hour or into minutes. I so appreciate that though. And I think it is, I love the take on not just where are you unique or how are you unique, but how are you uniquely positioned, whether that's your experience, your location, your passion areas, the people and to be able to say, don't dismiss that no matter where you are in the world. Be able to say, all right, what is unique about where you're at that might actually set you up for success in this particular area. And I think I love your phrase, be strategic, not reactionary. I think we live in a very reactionary world. I saw a very hilarious, sad, accurate GIF on Facebook the other day. It's like, want to get into a fight on Facebook? Post an opinion and wait 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's that old thing of saying, no, let's learn. Let's actually learn. Let's learn what we need to know so that we can actually make an impact. And then to be able to remember that it is a process. That's so good. So good. Again, we're going to have you back because we could go deep on each one of those concepts. So Ashleigh, I so appreciate how generous you are. I so appreciate the work that you're doing. And I know Dream Think Doers are going to want to find out more. They're probably going to want to sign up at Justice U. So tell us more. How do they find out more about you? How do they find out more about Justice U?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to learnwithjusticeu.com. And right now what we're doing is a 90-day sprint to educate 100,000 people to open 100,000 eyes and ears to this issue in their local communities. So it's that journey, right? So you get 3 online courses, a year of resources and tools. We're doing a virtual live event with people who are on the front lines in a few weeks to even dive deeper. But we're trying to help people start that journey and move from awareness to action and knowledge to impact. And that's as many different ways as there are many different people, who come to the table. But we got to recall this: traffickers are preying on those we don't see. So if we can see them and intercede, it will end. It will end, but it will take us all.
Yeah, it will. I believe in you. I believe in what you're doing. And this is so great. So Ashleigh, thank you so much. We will put all of that in the show notes so that people can find out more and get signed up at Justice U and join you in this fight. I know you stirred me up. I'm so appreciative. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you can't go back. Once you're aware, you can't go
Yeah.
back, right? Like you got to take action. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Oh, so glad to be doing it, and so thankful to be with you today.
All right, guys, bonus conversation that we're going to have with Ashleigh Chapman. Ashleigh, you probably remember, is a human rights lawyer. She is an expert on human trafficking, and one of her big dreams is to end human trafficking in our lifetime, which is absolutely huge, absolutely amazing. She's been doing hard work on this for the last 20 years, has incredible stories, but I invited her to share a story to kind of help us with our We Agree to Pray project and month. And we were talking, some stories started to flow. So I was like, would you share this with the family here a little bit? So Ashleigh, thanks so much for being willing to do a bonus conversation on this subject.
Absolutely. Yes.
I
Yeah,
love it.
love it.
Okay. So, we're talking about, when we agree to pray, we talk about, starting from a place of common ground where we just agree to pray. Now, different denominations, different styles, different music, all that stuff, but we're just agreeing to pray over this period of time. But I also want to give real stories of times where somebody's prayed and something's happened, right? Like, I think it's easy to just think prayer's kind of out there. It's something other people do, but I know prayer's been an important part of your efforts. So can you share kind of a fun or powerful or whatever? I don't know if it would be a fun story, but an example of prayer working out in the work that you do.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I mean, so many, right? 20 years of working on this issue and being a person of prayer, and many of my team members are too. So, but hardly any more powerful than when it saves lives. It immediately leads to, saving lives. And so a couple situations come to mind. One was I went to Thailand to go explore help with about 22 rescue operations in like 10 days and visit all of these amazing people who are working on the ground there and see how we could support their work. And one of the gentlemen I met there ran a really significant ministry, and so to hurting kids. Well, months later, when I was back at U.S. stateside, I got a call from him that his grandson had been kidnapped in an Eastern European country. And they were terrified, about the situation, and they didn't know how in the world to solve for it. So without giving too many details, right, because it was a live case, one of the things that had to happen was that we had to get in touch with the senator in the state where his mother had her domicile here in the United States. So she was married to this gentleman who then kidnapped their son and was taking him into a terrible kind of situation. And so, but I didn't have a relationship with that senator. And so I got the call while I was walking outside, and I just started to pray. And I reached out to a couple of my prayer warriors and said, let's pray. We got to find a way to get in touch with this woman in a way that she will pay attention to, right? And respond to. And when I sat down at my computer and opened my email, there was an email sitting in my inbox from the senator, who had recently heard about our work and was reaching out and asking for help for her state. So I didn't even have to try to find her information.
Like, so you're out for a walk, you get alerted to this, you start praying and asking others to pray with you, but nobody called the center saying, hey, help Ashleigh out. But
so she actually reached out to me for help. I had never spoken with her before.
Gosh.
It was precisely the woman we needed to talk to. And I was able to respond and say, oh, of course we can help with your situation. But by the way, I was just alerted 5 minutes ago.
While I have you on the line.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And that led to the rescue of that little boy. So it was really beautiful.
Kidding me?
Yeah. And in another situation, more domestic, we got a distressing call from a family. I won't name the states that were involved, but in a different state, with a child who, 17-year-old with Down syndrome, who had been kidnapped and was being trafficked. And they knew that because they knew who had taken her, and they knew, but they could not get the local law enforcement to engage. There was I think an infrastructure shift going on, with local law enforcement right at that moment,
Yeah.
so they were under-resourced to help. But the situation was, when they called me, of course, they were just in a desperate state. And I had just wrapped helping the attorney general of that state with all of their anti-trafficking efforts across the state. So I was able to immediately call the attorney general, and she was immediately able to activate a whole team of people to immediately then go in and rescue this child from the situation. And so that was something that was really very beautiful. And in the situation I shared on our previous podcast together, of the woman in Houston who called me, seeing a trafficking situation unfold in the hotel she was at, where she was at for a business conference. We had 2 weeks before, been with the Houston Police Department there, so we knew exactly who to call. And all of this driven by prayer, right, all the way through and through. So we get these calls, we lift them up to Jesus, and in about 5 to 10 minutes, we've got the answer. So there's this. I call it kind of
that is what we call a hotline. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. This spiritual hotline to connect all the right people.
I love that. But I also think what I love about that is that I think sometimes prayer is what we do when we are in our quiet space, right? Like when we are removed, and it is so good sometimes to just do a completely closed doors where we can connect with God, feel peace, intercede for everybody, all of that. And I think that is so beautiful and so powerful. But also at the same time, what I love in these stories is how prayer came alongside what you've been doing in the world, right? Like it's not something where, like, prayer is a powerful strategic tool, but it's not the only thing we can do, right? It's one of those where I think so often, if it comes alongside what we're doing and where we're taking action, right? Like it is amazing to think about in each of these examples, and I'm sure you could go on and on. It really is trusting in God and then saying yes and moving forward, and those relationships that come, the breakthroughs that come, all of that. So I just love that. I'm so glad we get to talk for 4 more hours and just keep this conversation going. I'll let you go, but I so appreciate, Ashleigh, you sharing those stories, that just another set of amazing examples in a completely different area that we've touched on before of how God's at work. And how you're partnering with God on prayer, in prayer, and also in action. So I love it. So just in case people only hear this, they haven't heard the other episode yet, where can they find out more about you? What's the best way to find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, go to learnwithjusticeu.com, justice you being a letter, learnwithjusticeu.com, and you'll get to know me, our team, and everything we can give you to help you understand more about this issue and get engaged in your local community.
I love it. All right, Ashleigh, thank you so much. You are amazing. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitch.